Fine, let's start. Number 1. The Macuahuitl. Imagine a weapon made of wood and volcanic glass that, by the testimony of hardened Spanish soldiers, could take the head off a horse in a single stroke. The Macuahuitl was not a sword in the European sense. It was a flat wooden blade, somewhere between 70 and 120 centimeters long, with rows of obsidian shards set into grooves along both edges and locked in place with bitumen and tree resin. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and when it fractures, it produces an edge only a few molecules thick. Measured under a microscope, that edge can reach roughly 3 nanometers, sharper than modern surgical steel. The Aztecs had no iron and no steel for their weapons. They had geology, and geology gave them a cutting edge that metal of the era could not match. The name comes from Nahuatl, often translated as handwood, or more vividly, hungry wood. The conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who fought through the conquest of Mexico, described these weapons opening terrible wounds, severing limbs in a stroke. The later Jesuit historian Francisco Javier Clavijero wrote that a Macuahuitl could behead a man and that it could cut clean through the neck of a horse. That horse decapitation claim is most often tied to the Battle of Otumba in 1520. Here's the strange part. Obsidian is brittle. Strike bone with it and it shatters. So the weapon was not built to chop through a skeleton. It was built to slice flesh and muscle, and the design fit the way the Aztecs fought. Much of Mesoamerican warfare revolved around taking captives alive for ritual sacrifice, so incapacitation often mattered more than killing outright. When a blade chipped, a warrior simply re-edged the club with fresh obsidian, which made it a maintainable field weapon rather than a one-use tool. The finest blades came from prized sources like the green-gold obsidian of Pachuca, and control of that volcanic glass was a strategic matter. Elite warrior societies, the Eagle and Jaguar Knights, carried decorated versions, and a longer two-handed form, the Macuahuitl, was swung like a glaive. The Florentine Codex, compiled under the Friar Bernardino de Sahagún, shows these weapons in the hands of warriors. The only documented original survived in the royal armory in Madrid until a fire destroyed it in 1884. Today, we have only drawings and replicas. Scholars classify it as a sword club, a hybrid delivering both crushing and cutting trauma. Some historians stress its practical lethality, others its design around ritual capture, and a few suspect the Spanish chroniclers exaggerated. What no one disputes is that a Stone Age weapon left steel-clad Europeans bleeding. But the deadliest weapon of the Deep Ice Age was not a blade at all. It was a lever. Number 2. The Atlatl. Long before the bow, humans found a way to cheat the limits of their own arm. The Atlatl is a spear thrower, a rigid shaft about 30 to 60 centimeters long, with a hook or spur at one end that cradles the butt of a light spear called a dart. When the thrower snaps the device forward, the Atlatl acts as an extension of the arm, multiplying the speed of the throw. Recorded dart speeds reach 100 kilometers per hour and beyond, with some tests passing 150, and effective ranges from 30 to over 100 meters. The word Atlatl is Nahuatl, but the device itself is global, and it is far older than the bow. Carved examples from France, from sites like Madazil and Comps-Saunière, are roughly 14,000 to 17,000 years old. Some researchers argue the technology stretches back 30,000 years or more, based on the shape of dart points. In Australia, the equivalent tool is the Woomera, which doubled as a multi-purpose implement. The physics are elegant. As the dart launches, it flexes and bends, storing and releasing energy, much like an archer's arrow. Archaeologists call this the spear thrower's paradox. In North America, mysterious carved stones called banner stones were often mounted on atlatls. Their exact purpose is still debated. They may have tuned the flex of the weapon, added useful mass, or even dampened sound. What the Atlatl gave the hunter was distance. Clovis-era hunters almost certainly used it against mammoths, mastodons, and bison, striking from a safer range than a thrusting spear would allow. The weapon demanded real skill, which favored specialized hunters and warriors, and impact fracture analysis on stone points helps researchers tell Atlatl use apart from a simple thrust. The Atlatl was not just a hunting tool, it was a battlefield weapon into historic times. When the Aztecs fought the Spanish, their Atlatl darts could punch through armor that arrows could not penetrate, a fact noted in Spanish accounts. Modern competition throwers with the World Atlatl Association have sent darts more than 250 meters. There is a darker question attached to this weapon. Some scientists link the Atlatl's killing efficiency to the decline of Pleistocene megafauna, the so-called overkill idea. Others point to the warming climate at the end of the Ice Age. Most now suspect a combination of hunting pressure and environmental change. Whatever the cause, the Atlatl deserves a title. It was arguably the first machine humans built to store and amplify muscular energy and fling it at a target. And the next weapon would do something no projectile had done before. It would force an empire to rebuild its armor. Number 3. The Dacian Falx. Few weapons in history can claim to have forced a superpower to redesign its standard equipment in the middle of a war. The Dacian Falx did exactly that. It was a single-edged curved blade, sharpened on the inner concave edge, used by the Dacians and Thracians along the lower Danube, in what is now Romania. It came in two sizes. The shorter one-handed version, the Sika, ran about 30 to 40 centimeters. The two-handed Falx, blade plus haft, often passed a full meter. The genius of the weapon was its geometry. The curve concentrated force toward the tip and let the wielder reach over the top of a shield, or hook around its edge, to strike the head, neck, or limbs of the man behind it. A Roman legionary's defense was built around the large rectangular shield, the scutum, and the Falx was, in effect, a tool designed to make that shield irrelevant. During the Dacian Wars of the Emperor Trajan, fought between 101 and 106 AD, the Falx inflicted gruesome head and limb wounds on Roman soldiers. The Roman response is one of the clearest cases of battlefield engineering we have. Roman armorers reinforced the standard helmet with crossed iron bars over the skull, a visible cross-bracing that appears on surviving imperial helmets. They added an articulated arm guard, the manica, to protect the sword arm, and they reintroduced greaves to shield the legs. Trajan's column in Rome, dedicated around 113 AD, shows Dacian warriors wielding the Falx and Roman soldiers in this reinforced gear. The weapon was forged from iron and held its curved edge. Choosing it meant a trade-off. The two-handed grip forced the warrior to give up his own shield, betting everything on overwhelming offense. Wound analysis from the period confirms deep cranial trauma consistent with the weapon. King Decebalus of Dacia combined the Falx with rugged terrain to resist Rome before the kingdom finally fell in 106 AD. The Latin word falx simply means sickle or scythe, a reminder that this terror of the battlefield descended from a farming tool. A related Thracian weapon, the rhomphaia, carried a straighter long blade with similar two-handed use. The hooking action of the Falx could even drag a shield aside to expose its owner. After Dacia was absorbed and Romanized, the weapon faded, but the reinforced helmet it inspired spread across the Roman army. Modern reconstructions confirm the Falx could split a wooden shield and a helmet replica. Historians debate whether its real power lay in defeating armor, in sheer psychological terror, or in the emphasis Roman propaganda placed on it. But the Falx proves a principle that echoes through this whole list. Sometimes the cheapest idea humbles the most expensive army, and nothing was cheaper or more humbling than a cord and a stone. Number 4. The Sling. The sling looks like nothing. 2 cords and a small pouch. Yet in trained hands it could kill an armored man at a distance that shames most ancient bows. The slinger whirls the pouch overhead, building speed, then releases one cord to launch a stone, or better, a cast lead bullet. Historical ranges reached 130 meters, and skilled slingers could throw well past 400. A heavy lead bullet, called a glans, carried kinetic energy that in extreme cases has been compared to a modern handgun round. The most feared slingers of the ancient world were the Balearic Islanders from Majorca and Minorca, hired as mercenaries by Carthage and later Rome. The Romans cast their bullets from lead and sometimes inscribed them with taunts, with the names of commanders, or with crude messages to the enemy, the ancient equivalent of writing on ammunition. Archaeologists have pulled these inscribed glans out of the ground across the old Roman world. The biblical duel of David and Goliath, set in tradition around the 10th century BC, made the sling the archetypal giant killer, the humble weapon that fells the armored champion. Assyrian palace reliefs from the 9th to 7th centuries BC, from Nimrud and Nineveh, show slingers in action during sieges. Lead bullets were not just cheap. They were aerodynamically superior to stones. The biconical, almond-like shapes reduced drag, flew flatter, and some were even drilled, so they whistled in flight to unnerve the enemy. That whistling is not a legend. At Burnswark Hill in Scotland, archaeologists found Roman sling bullets with small drilled holes that would have screamed through the air, almost certainly a psychological weapon. The Greek soldier and writer Xenophon, in his account of the 10,000, recorded how Rhodian slingers outranged the Persian archers during the long Greek retreat, turning the tide of a desperate march. The sling had enormous practical advantages. It was light, nearly free, and its ammunition could be gathered off the ground or carried by the sackful on the march. A skilled slinger could keep up a high rate of fire, harassing enemy formations before the lines ever met. A bullet to an unprotected head could kill instantly, and even a helmet often meant only a concussion or a fractured skull instead of death. The catch was training. Becoming a deadly slinger took years, which is why expert slingers were prized specialist troops rather than common levies. Because the cords were perishable, almost no battlefield slings survive. The lead bullets are our main evidence, scattered across old battle lines like metal breadcrumbs. Historians argue over whether the slinger's fame rests on ballistics, on terror, or simply on the rarity of the skill. The next weapon needed no sling and no bow. It hooked its victims close, and it belonged to kings. Number 5. The Khopesh. The Khopesh is one of the most recognizable weapons of the ancient world, a bronze sickle sword with a curved, hook-shaped blade sharpened along the outer edge of the curve. It usually ran 50 to 60 centimeters long. Its ancestor was the Mesopotamian sapra, a hybrid of axe and sickle sword, and the Egyptians adopted and refined the form, especially during the New Kingdom from roughly 1550 to 1070 BC. The hook design was not for show. The curved tip could catch an enemy's shield and pull it down or aside, opening the body to the cutting edge, or it could hook a limb. It was cast from bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, and later examples show finer casting and decoration. The weapon was balanced for slashing, with enough weight behind it to chop. The name Khopesh is linked to an Egyptian word for the foreleg of an animal, a nod to its curved shape. Pharaohs are shown wielding it as a sign of military power, and the weapon appears in the reliefs of great campaigning kings like Thutmose III and Rameses II. The Battle of Megiddo, fought around 1457 BC under Thutmose III, is among the earliest battles described in real detail, and weapons like the Khopesh equipped its armies. This was also a royal and sacred object. In Egyptian art, the gods are sometimes shown handing the Khopesh to the king, blessing his rule with the power to crush enemies. The image of the pharaoh raising a weapon over a kneeling captive, the so-called smiting pose, is one of the oldest visual symbols of Egyptian kingship, and the Khopesh became shorthand for victory itself. 2 Khopesh swords were recovered from the tomb of Tutankhamun, the boy king who died around 1323 BC, proof of the weapon's status even among royalty. Some Khopesh blades found in burials were deliberately bent or killed, a ritual act of taking the weapon out of the world of the living. The sword could be used by infantry on foot and by charioteers alike, and its hooking function makes it an early and deliberate piece of anti-shield engineering. As iron metallurgy spread through the Near East, the bronze Khopesh was gradually superseded, but its influence rippled across the Levant, where similar sickle swords appeared throughout the Bronze Age. Historians still weigh how much of the Khopesh was a practical battlefield tool, and how much was a ceremonial emblem of authority, a weapon that ruled as much by symbol as by edge. The next weapon ruled by range, and it would arm the largest land empires the world had ever seen. Number 6. The Composite Recurve Bow. The composite bow is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, a weapon built by combining different materials for their different mechanical properties. At its heart is a wooden core. On the belly, the side facing the archer, sits a layer of horn, which resists compression. On the back, facing the target, lies a layer of sinew, which resists being stretched. All of it is bound together with glue made from boiled hide or fish. The result stores far more energy for its length than a simple wooden self-bow, which means the weapon can be short and still hit terribly hard. That compactness is the key. A short bow can be drawn and fired from the back of a galloping horse. The recurved tips, which curve away from the archer when unstrung, add even more efficiency and arrow speed. War bows could reach draw weights of 45 to 70 kilograms, launching arrows 150 to over 300 meters. Building one was a feat of patience. The slow curing of the hide glue could stretch construction to a year or more, which made the composite bow a labor-intensive and valuable possession. It had one great enemy: humidity. Damp weather weakened the hide glue, which is a major reason the simple wooden self-bow, like the later English longbow, persisted in wet Europe. But across the dry grasslands of Eurasia, the composite bow reigned. The Scythians of the first millennium BC, then the Huns, the Parthians, and finally the Mongols built mounted archery empires around it. The famous Parthian shot, firing backward over the horse's tail while feigning retreat, was only possible because of this short, powerful weapon. When the bow was paired with the stirrup, widely adopted in the first millennium AD, horse archery became devastating. A rider could now stand firm in the saddle and shoot with full power. Under Genghis Khan in the 13th century, Mongol armies used the composite bow to harass, outrange, and disintegrate slower infantry across continents. The weapon also armed the chariot archers of New Kingdom Egypt and Assyria. We know how these bows were made because some have survived, preserved in the frozen burial mounds of Scythian chiefs and in the dry tombs of Egypt. Arrowheads evolved alongside them, from bronze three-bladed points to iron heads designed to defeat armor. Archers in Asia often used a thumb draw with a thumb ring, allowing a fast, powerful release, and the bow's compactness let them carry quivers packed with arrows for rapid shooting. Trade and conquest spread the technology across Eurasia and into India and China. Historians debate what truly made it dominant: the material engineering, the mobility it allowed, or the stirrup that unlocked its full power. The answer is probably all three, and all three came together on a wheeled platform that would define an age. Number 7. The War Chariot. The War Chariot was the first true mobile weapons platform in history. A light horse-drawn vehicle, usually two-wheeled, carrying a driver and a warrior who was often an archer. Its secret was the spoked wheel. A solid disc wheel is heavy and slow. A spoked wheel is light and fast, and it appears around 2000 BC on the Eurasian steppe. The oldest known spoke-wheeled chariots come from the Sintashta Petrovka culture of the southern Urals, found in burials dated to roughly 2000 BC. From that steppe origin, the chariot spread with astonishing speed, reaching the Near East, Egypt, India, and China within a few centuries. It became the elite arm of Bronze Age armies, a weapon that announced the wealth and power of a state. Maintaining chariotry was enormously expensive. It required horses, skilled crews, wheelwrights to build and repair the vehicles, and good ground to drive them on. A chariot force was a statement that a kingdom could afford the very best. The grandest chariot clash we know of is the Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BC between Rameses II of Egypt and Muwatalli II of the Hittites. Thousands of chariots took the field. The two empires built them differently. Egyptian chariots were light, fast, two-man vehicles with the warrior firing a composite bow. Hittite chariots were heavier and carried 3 crew, trading speed for the punch of close combat. The chariot could serve as a mobile missile platform, raining arrows, as a shock unit, or as a fast command vehicle for nobles. In China, the Shang dynasty around 1200 BC used chariots as elite weapons and status symbols, and they appear in the royal burials at Anyang. Across Eurasia, from Sintashta to Shang China to Celtic Europe, chariot burials underline the prestige of the weapon. In bursts on flat ground, a chariot could reach 30 to 40 kilometers per hour, letting it reposition faster than any foot soldier. It created a whole warrior aristocracy, men like the Marianu of the Near East, defined by their access to this expensive machine. The chariot needed a missile weapon to reach its potential, and the composite bow was its natural partner. Yet its dominance did not last. Effective cavalry, eventually aided by the stirrup, and the rise of massed, disciplined infantry made the chariot too costly and too fragile. The upheaval of the Sea Peoples and the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC shattered many of the states that depended on it. Mycenaean Greece, which recorded its chariots in linear B inventory tablets, fell in that same wave. Later, the Persians fitted scythed chariots with blades on the wheel hubs to terrify and break infantry lines, a last spectacular gasp of the technology. The chariot fused animal power, the wheel, and the bow into one weapon. But on another continent, a small stone point may have changed the world even more profoundly. Number 8. The Clovis Point. The Clovis Point is a small object with a giant scientific shadow. It is a stone projectile point, finely flaked on both faces, with a distinctive channel called a flute removed from its base. That flute is the key feature. It let the point be socketed and lashed onto a wooden foreshaft, which was then mounted on an Atlatl dart or a thrusting spear. The points are named for Clovis, New Mexico, where they were found in the 1930s at the Blackwater Draw site, lying among the bones of mammoths. They date to roughly 13,000 to 12,700 years ago, defining what archaeologists call the Clovis culture of late Ice Age North America. Clovis points turn up across the entire continent, which tells us the technology spread fast and worked well. They were made from high-quality stone, chert, flint, jasper, and obsidian, sometimes carried hundreds of kilometers from where it was quarried, a sign of how much these tools were valued. For decades, the Clovis first hypothesis held that these hunters were the very first people in the Americas. That idea has been challenged by older sites, like Monteverde in Chile and the human footprints at White Sands in New Mexico, which suggest people arrived earlier. But the lethality of the Clovis Point is not in doubt. The weapon is associated with kill sites of mammoths, mastodons, and bison, including the Naco and Linner sites in Arizona, where points were found among the bones of fallen giants. This is where the Clovis Point enters one of the great debates in science. The overkill hypothesis, argued famously by Paul Martin, proposes that Clovis hunters, armed with these points, helped drive North America's megafauna to extinction. Critics counter that the rapidly warming climate at the end of the Ice Age was the real killer, destroying the habitats these huge animals depended on. Most researchers today suspect both forces work together, hunting pressure on populations already stressed by a changing world. Making a Clovis Point was risky and difficult. The fluting, knocking that channel off the base could shatter the entire point if it went wrong, so success demanded great skill and may even have served as a kind of social signaling. At the Anzac site in Montana, dated to around 12,700 years ago, archaeologists found a cache of dozens of points and tools buried with the remains of a child. In 2014, the Anzac child's genome was sequenced, and it linked the Clovis people directly to modern Native Americans, a profound connection across deep time. Clovis technology lasted only a few centuries before regional styles like the smaller bison-focused Folsom Point emerged after the mammoths were gone. Use wear and impact fractures confirm these points were genuine weapon tips, not just symbols. The Clovis Point stands as a haunting case where a single weapon design may have helped reshape the ecology of an entire continent. The next weapon was simpler still, and it was built for one purpose only: to kill other human beings. Number 9. The mace. The mace is brutally simple: a heavy head, first of stone, later of copper and bronze, mounted on a short handle. It does not cut. It crushes. And that simplicity hides something important. The mace is among the very first weapons made specifically to kill humans rather than to hunt animals. A hunting spear or an axe works on hide and bone in the wild, but the mace is engineered around a different target: the human skull and the human body. Stone mace heads appear in the Neolithic and become widespread through the Chalcolithic and the Bronze Age across the Near East and Egypt. The early heads were often pear-shaped or disc-shaped pieces of stone, drilled through the center to fit a wooden haft. One of the most famous artifacts in all of Egyptian archaeology is the Narmer mace head, tied to the smiting iconography of around 3100 BC, in which the king crushes his enemies. That image stands at the very birth of the Egyptian state, and the mace is its central symbol. The weapon worked by concentrating force onto a small area, transmitting shock through whatever protection the enemy wore. Against an unprotected or lightly protected head, a mace blow was devastating, and its effectiveness is exactly what drove the development of better helmets. This is one of the oldest arms races we can trace. As armor and helmets improved, the simple mace lost some of its edge, only to return in later eras as the flanged maces built to dent and pierce plate armor. The mace also reveals a deep truth about human society. From the start, it was both a weapon and an emblem of authority. Mace heads are common grave goods, buried as symbols of power. And in ancient Mesopotamia, maces appear in art as the weapons of gods and kings. The link between the weapon and the symbol of office never fully broke. The ceremonial maces carried in parliaments and universities today are direct descendants of this Stone Age skullcrusher. In Egypt, the form evolved with purpose, from the disc-shaped head, better at delivering slashing wounds, to the piriform or pear-shaped head, optimized for crushing. The Narmer palette and mace head are key artifacts of early Egyptian state formation, fusing warfare and kingship in stone. Skeletal remains from Neolithic sites show blunt force cranial trauma consistent with mace or club blows, grim physical evidence of the weapon in use. Because its earliest form needed little metallurgy, just a shaped and drilled stone, the mace appeared independently across cultures worldwide. Historians debate whether it began as a practical weapon, as a ritual emblem, or as both fused together from the beginning. The mace marks the moment weapons began to specialize around human anatomy as the target. The final weapon on our list took that logic to its conclusion. It had no purpose at all except war. Number 10. The bronze sword. Almost every weapon we have discussed began as something else. The mace grew from the club, the falx from the sickle, the atlatl from the hunt. The sword was different. The first true sword, a long blade designed for combat, and nothing else, has no farming or hunting ancestor. It is purely a tool of war, and it was born from bronze. Bronze, copper alloyed with about 10% tin, is hard enough to hold an edge and to be cast into a long blade, something impossible with soft, pure copper. The sword emerged with Bronze Age metallurgy from around 1600 BC onward. Swords evolved out of daggers. The first long blades were the rapiers of the Aegean world, the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, from roughly 1700 to 1400 BC. These early thrusting rapiers had a serious flaw. The hilt was weakly attached and tended to break under the shock of combat. The solution arrived with the Naue II sword, a leaf-shaped, cut-and-thrust blade from around 1300 to 1200 BC, whose flanged, riveted hilt held firm. This design proved so effective that it spread across Europe and the Mediterranean, and its arrival coincided with the turmoil of the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC and a shift toward new infantry tactics. Making swords meant controlling metal. Copper was relatively common, but tin was rare and had to be traded over vast distances, from sources as far apart as Cornwall in Britain and the mountains of Afghanistan. The leaf shape itself was a clever compromise, a wide midsection for cutting power and a tapering point for the thrust, while smiths developed hilt designs specifically to keep blade and grip from separating under impact. Casting allowed standardized blades to be produced in numbers, equipping larger armies than ever before. Bronze swords appear across Europe, the Near East, and Asia. In China, smiths produce sophisticated bronze Jian swords, and one of the most astonishing is the Sword of Gujian, dated to around the 5th century BC. When it was unearthed in 1965, the blade was virtually untarnished after some 2,500 years in the ground, thanks to its alloy and a corrosion-resistant surface layer. In the Aegean, the warrior graves of Mycenae and the spectacular Griffin warrior tomb at Pylos, discovered in 2015, held ornate bronze swords beside their owners. The sword quickly became more than a weapon. It was a symbol of warrior status and elite identity, often richly decorated, carried in life, and buried in death. Analysis of surviving blades shows them used, resharpened, and sometimes deliberately broken in ritual. In time, iron and then steel, harder and made from far more abundant ore, would supersede bronze entirely. But the bronze sword marks a turning point in the human story. It is the moment metallurgy was bent fully and exclusively toward killing, and its spread across the ancient world reflects a kind of Bronze Age globalization of military technology. 10 weapons, then, each deadly in its own way. But stepping back, a pattern emerges in how all of them achieved their lethality. Look across these 10 weapons, and they sort themselves into a few simple principles, each one a different road to lethality. The first road is the material edge. The Macuahuitl, the Khopesh, and the bronze sword all won by putting a better cutting surface into a warrior's hand, whether that surface was volcanic glass, sharper than steel, hooked bronze, or a cast leaf blade. The second road is stored mechanical energy. The Atlatl, the Sling, and the Composite Bow each found a way to take the limited power of human muscle and concentrate it, amplify it, and hurl it across distance. A lever, a whirling cord, a laminated bow, all of them machines for cheating the limits of the body. The third road is geometry and leverage in close combat. The Falx reached over a shield by virtue of its curve, and the Mace transmitted crushing force through armor by concentrating it on a single point. Neither tried to outmuscle the enemy. Each out-engineered him. The fourth road is the platform. The War Chariot turned animal power and the wheel into a mobile firing position. And even the humble Clovis Point belongs here, because its fluted base was a hafting solution, a way to marry a deadly stone tip to a shaft and a thrower. What ties them together is a single insight that runs through the entire history of weapons. Deadliness, again and again, did not come from being stronger. It came from being cleverer. The warrior who won was rarely the one with the biggest arm. He was the one whose weapon had out-thought the human body itself. And every time one side found a clever new way to kill, the other side was forced to answer. Warfare is never a one-sided story. Every weapon that mattered on this list summoned a response, and those responses are some of the earliest arms races in human history. The clearest example is the Dacian Falx. It cut so savagely through Roman soldiers that the legions physically rebuilt their helmets, adding crossed iron bars over the skull, strapping armor onto the sword arm, and bringing back greaves for the legs. A single tribal weapon reshaped the equipment of the most powerful army on Earth. The mace tells the same story from the other end of time. Its skull-crushing blows are part of why helmets were invented at all, and the long contest between impact weapons and head protection ran for thousands of years, from Neolithic stone heads to the flanged maces built to dent medieval plate. The sling pushed soldiers toward the shield and the shield wall, dense formations that could weather a storm of lead bullets before closing. And as armor improved across the Bronze and Iron Ages, arrowheads evolved in answer, from broad bronze points to narrow iron heads shaped to punch through it. This is the deep rhythm of military history, visible already in prehistory. A new way to kill appears. A new way to survive answers it. Then the cycle turns again. The weapons that changed warfare forever did so not as isolated inventions, but as moves in a contest that never really ended. And behind every move in that contest stood something less visible than the weapon itself: the vast effort required to make it. A weapon is only as deadly as the system that produces it, and the weapons on this list rested on hidden networks of effort, trade, and skill. Consider the materials alone. The finest Macuahuitl blades depended on prized obsidian sources like Pachuca, and the trade in volcanic glass was a strategic resource for Mesoamerican states. The bronze sword and the Khopesh required tin, one of the rarest metals of the ancient world, hauled across thousands of kilometers from places as distant as Cornwall and Afghanistan. Control of that tin meant the power to arm an army. Then consider the labor. A single composite bow could take more than a year to build, because the hide glue binding horn, wood, and sinew had to cure slowly. That is not a weapon you mass produce in a week. It is an investment of months of a craftsman's patience. The War Chariot demanded even more: an entire ecosystem of horse breeding, wheel riding, and roadworthy ground, plus skilled crews trained to drive and fight at speed. A chariot force was less a piece of equipment than a small industry. Even the stone weapons hid surprising reach. Clovis points were knapped from high-quality stone carried hundreds of kilometers from its source, evidence that Ice Age hunters maintained long supply lines for their best tool-making material. The lesson is that the weapons which changed warfare also changed economies and states. To field them, societies had to organize trade routes, specialist crafts, and the control of scarce resources. The blade in a warrior's hand was the visible tip of an invisible machine of human cooperation. And for all we have learned about these weapons, a great deal about them remains genuinely unknown. For all our research, these weapons still keep their secrets, and the honest answer to many questions is that we are not sure. Take the Atlatl banner stones, those beautifully carved stones mounted on North American spear throwers. Archaeologists still argue about what they actually did. Were they weights that tuned the flex of the dart, simple mass to steady the throw, or even silencers to dampen the sound of the launch? The evidence supports several readings, and the debate is unresolved. The Clovis Point sits at the center of an even larger mystery. Did the hunters who carried it really drive the mammoths and mastodons to extinction? Or did the warming climate at the end of the Ice Age do the killing, with human hunting only finishing the job? Decades of research have narrowed the question without settling it. The Macuahuitl raises a different kind of doubt. How much did the Spanish chroniclers exaggerate when they wrote of horses beheaded in a single blow? The original weapon burned in a Madrid fire in 1884, so we test the claim only on replicas. Other gaps remain. We do not know the exact draw weights of the great composite war bows that have rotted away, only estimates from the survivors. We are unsure how many soldiers the Persian scythed chariots truly killed, as opposed to how much terror they spread. Each of these questions is a reminder that the deep past does not surrender its details easily. We hold the weapons in our hands, or at least their fragments, and still we have to reason carefully about how they were used and what they meant. So why do these 10 weapons deserve to be called the ones that changed warfare forever? Not simply because they killed efficiently, though they did. The deeper reason is that each of them changed who held power. The War Chariot created an entire aristocracy, the Marianu and their like, nobles defined by their access to horses and wheels that ordinary soldiers could never match. The Sling and the Composite Bow created prized specialists, men whose years of training made them valuable far beyond their numbers. Control of bronze, of tin, of obsidian put military power into the hands of those who commanded trade and resources. A weapon, in other words, is never only about the battlefield. It decides who can fight, who can rule, and who is left behind. The Macuahuitl led a Stone Age empire, bloody steel-armored invaders. The Falx led a Danube kingdom force Rome itself to change. The Clovis Point may have helped empty a continent of its giants. In each case, the weapon did not just win battles. It reshaped the balance of power among the people who made and carried it. And there is one long thread running from the first of these weapons to the last. It begins with an edge of volcanic glass and ends with the deliberate layering of horn, wood, and sinew into a single tool, the marriage of different materials chosen for their different strengths. That is the logic of modern composite engineering, discovered thousands of years ago by people who simply wanted to throw a little harder and cut a little deeper. The deadliest weapons of the deep past were not just instruments of death. They were monuments to human ingenuity, turned, for better or worse, toward the oldest problem of all: